Alright, the connections for a Riada model APA, got 120 volt, just standard supply. You got air connection here, filter regulator set on 90 to 100 psi. Product will go in the actuated valve in the back of the tank, which is flow controlled. When the reservoir calls for product, the float will make and open the valve and let product into your tank. Alright, initially I want to go over some of the components and terminology that I'll be using later in the video. We'll refer to this as the head bar. Of course, these are fill nozzles. This conveyor and filler set up to run left to right. So this will be considered our entry cylinder because this is where the bottles are coming in. This will be, we'll call this our exit cylinder. This product supply tank, overflow tank, pumps down there, manifolds in back. I want to go over the operation of how a standard overflow nozzle works. The product is pumped out of the supply tank through a manifold into the top outlet in the nozzle. And what it does, it enters the nozzle and goes down through the center tube of the nozzle and comes out the holes, whichever hole configuration happens to be on the particular nozzle, into the container. The way it works is when the head comes down, this rubber gasket seals off on top of the bottle and it traps the air, everything that's in the bottle. And what it does, it pumps until it reaches this point where it overflows and comes back up the outer sleeve and out the overflow back into the supply tank. And the way you set the fill height is by how far you put the overflow portion down into the container. So we do that by a series of spacers. You can remove the sealing washer, which is the rubber portion, and it's got a backing washer. So we have a series of spacers from a 1/16 of an inch up to 1.5 inches. And what you do is, when it comes down on the bottle, the higher this is in the bottle, the more product it's going to put in there. So you would add spacers to add product, and you would take off spacers to take out product. All right. Everything on the operation of the Riada APA is time-based. I'm going to go over the operation with you now. What happens first when you initially hit the start button, there's a delay you can adjust how long it actually, from the time you hit the button to when it actually starts the process of moving the bottles in. Because the first thing that happens is it moves the bottles in. So as soon as you hit the start button, the conveyor will automatically start up and the exit cylinder will retract. And what that'll do is bottles that are under the head that are full, or if you're starting up for the first time, it would run those out. And then what we'll do is we'll hold the entry cylinder, which is entry cylinder retract on the PLC, we'll hold it for 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds. What that'll do, that'll create a gap between the full bottles and the empty bottles. And then those will continue down the conveyor. What we're going to do is we're going to time our exit cylinder extend to hit that gap between the full bottles and the empty bottles. Once the exit cylinder has extended between the gap, the conveyor will run long enough to tighten all those bottles up against the exit cylinder. Maybe run for a second and a half after they touch the exit cylinder to tighten all the bottles up, make sure they're all in place. What they'll do at that point, the conveyor will stop, the entry cylinder will return back in, and then the head, we've got a delay for how long we want before we tell the head to go down. Usually a second or so, make sure everything's in and settled down, and then the head will go down with the bottles. There's also, at that point, we'll have a pump delay. What that allows us to do is it gives us time to get the heads down in the bottle before we actually start the pump. Now, the most important thing you need to remember is when the heads are lowered onto the bottles, that when the heads come down and it raises that nozzle up, you want to make sure that all the coils on the spring are touching. What that tells us is that the head is completely open and we've got full overflow capacity into the nozzle. If that doesn't happen, if it doesn't come up far enough, it doesn't let you relieve your pressure, doesn't let the overflow out, and the bottles will tend to swell up. So always remember, when the head comes down, it's got to be down low enough that all the coils are touching. And that'll change if you change the spacers, change the height. And the way you set the height of of it coming down are by these crank handles. They actually are the stops for how far you let it come down. And then the top height above the bottles we set with the shaft collars on the 2 guide rods. There's no set measurement on that. You just want to have enough clearance that all the bottles will clear the heads as they travel underneath. All right, once we've got that set, just move the bottles in, the heads can come down, the pump will start. You want to run your pump long enough until they all overflow. Because they're just going to reach that point and they'll just sit there and overflow into the tank. You don't want to run too much time, but sitting there just wasting time with it overflows. So you want to watch it, and whenever the last one is to overflow, that's when you want to have time your pump to shut off. And then there's the head up delay. That's what happens next. What that does is usually set on 1 to 2 seconds. When it gets done filling, it keeps the head down on top of the bottles to relieve that pressure we've got while we're filling the bottles to relieve and go back into the tank before we raise the head. And then once that happens, then the head will rise up and it'll sit there. We've got the last timer in the PLC is a cycle timer. And what it does, we can set it for the amount of time we want before the machine actually repeats again. So we set it for, that's how we set our rate of production. So if we need more time down the line, say we're capping by hand, or we just need more time to put them in a box, we can add time to that timer, and what will allow us to, what it will raise up after it gets done filling, it will sit there until it times out, and then the process will repeat again. Anytime you can hit the stop button, the filling process, it's moving the bottles in, whatever, the machine will stop, and the heads will rise, and it'll go back to ground zero. It'll be ready to hit the start button again. I will go over the control buttons on the panel. We've got a start and stop, e-stop. We've got a float switch where we can turn our float off, so when you get to the end of a run, you can turn your float off where it'll close the valve, the actuated valve for the fill on our tank. We've got a conveyor switch where we can turn the conveyor off. We've got conveyor speed, which determines how fast our conveyor is running. And we've got a switch where we can turn our pump on. I don't want to go over, now I want to go over the operator interface for the PLC that controls all the operations of the filling machine. The way you scroll through the program to get to the timer you want is through the plus and the minus keys. You can only change the timer that's at the top where the blinking cursor is. So say I wanted to change the start delay time. I would get it to the top, I would hit the enter key, and the blinking cursor, wherever it's at, is the digit I can change. Now this is set up where there's a decimal point after the first digit, so that's actually, it would be 0.7 seconds. Say I wanted to make that 2.7 seconds, I would use the over arrow, get to the digit I want to change, and then just hit the plus key twice, and then hit enter, and it goes back the blinking cursor on the left hand side. I just scroll through with the plus key to get whichever item I want to change to the top row where the blinking cursor is, and do the same. Say if I needed more pump time, I need to run my pump a little longer, I get to the top, hit enter, say I wanted that, make it 12 seconds. I would come over, change that digit to 1, go over, and I would go down to the 2. Oh, too far. And once I get it where I want it, I just hit the enter key, and it goes back, and I'm ready for operation.